Now, can red meat be green? That was a question debated by a panel of leading environmentalists and scientists at a forum held in Sydney recently and hosted by MLA. It was the first in a series of events to be held round the country with the aim of getting youth and the urban media involved in the debate about producing red meat sustainably. Tim Dawson brings you the highlights.
So welcome to our big think tag today on what is, I think, a really important topic, a subject that I think we can all put our minds to. How can we make our red meat green?
The venue was St Ignatius College, Riverview. The audience, students from 10 local high schools. The panel, scientists, academics and industry representatives. The MC set the scene.
2009 really sees us at a crossroads really in resolving one of the great dilemmas that as a globe I think we've ever had, certainly as a scientific community. It's the conundrum we have between the challenge of feeding another 3 billion people by 2050, and yet at the same time we've got to do that in a sustainable, environmentally sustainable way and in a changing climate.
Sustainable agriculture expert Professor Costa told the audience that Australia can rise to the challenge.
Well, the key thing is the red meat industry in Australia, the livestock industry, is just an exemplar in terms of sustainable dryland farming. We've led the world in these farming systems, and the challenge we now have is climate change.
Professor Flannery, a former Australian of the Year, proposed that grazing animals were part of the solution to global warming because of their role in the natural cycle of storing carbon, or sequestration.
You've got to use the planet to solve the problem, and the power of the planet, the power of plants and the power of animals together to solve the problem. Doesn't mean that industry isn't important as well. We've got to reduce those industrial emissions, but we'll never solve the problem unless we use the power of living things to do so.
MLA reminded the audience that Australian red meat producers provide high-quality protein to feed millions of people around the world, and outlined what it's doing to help reduce methane emissions.
The sheep and cattle industries of Australia, along with the federal government, have allocated $28 million over the next 4 years in a research portfolio all designed around genetic improvements, pasture research and rumen biology, all about designed to turn off animals quicker, faster, cheaper, better, and all about reducing emissions. In fact, the Australian livestock industries have, since 1990, reduced emissions by 7.5%, which is in marked contrast to various other industries and matters in society over the last 20 years.
MLA explained where further reductions could come from.
You can decrease methane by something like 10% by better herd management, by better reproduction and culling unproductive animals, by something again like 15% by breeding for naturally low methane producing animal types. So if we do all of these things, we can make incremental gains.
Sam Archer, an industry leader when it comes to sustainable red meat production, said reducing carbon pollution was only one part of the equation.
We're working with nature, so we're trying to bring back into our environment native pastures. We're finding a balance between production and our marginal areas where we're seeking to produce ecological goods and services. And we're taking a whole of landscape approach. And whilst this afternoon we've heard a lot about carbon, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's a whole range of other environmental initiatives that are being undertaken to underpin biodiversity, water, soil and salinity as well.
I was thinking that if you wanted any kind of radical shift from the means that we already have to a more environmentally sustainable means of farming, there would be a lot of backlash in terms of profitability. So is there enough support?
I'd have to say that it's about finding a balance, and certainly the practices that we've put in place on our farm and hundreds of farmers have put in place on theirs are both profitable and sustainable.
That's the trick, both with agriculture and the rest of the economy, is finding a way to send the right signals to businesses, farm businesses, food businesses, right through the value chain, so that they see it is in their interests, in their profit interests, to do the right thing by the environment. They cannot do the job alone. It's the task of all of us. But even before governments act, all of us must act. Supermarkets, agribusinesses, restaurateurs, schools, hotels, householders, we can all do so much more. And yes, it will mean change. And yes, some of that change will be difficult. But change is coming, ready or not.
Since that panel discussion, the political machinations over targets have continued. Here in Canberra, the carbon pollution reduction scheme didn't get through the Senate, but the government has indicated that agriculture won't be included. But whilst the world negotiates, Australian producers are getting on with the job. With the help of MLA, they're telling the Australian community just how well they're looking after the environment and just how well they're producing greener, red meat for the world to eat.